Bienvenidos to this, our final program in support of the East Side Dreams exhibit. Yes. Before we begin, let me provide the land acknowledgement as we gather here at SJSU. We are gathered on the ethno-historic tribal territory of the Thamian Ohlone, who were the direct ancestors of the lineages enrolled in the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, and who were missionized in Mission Santa Clara, San José, and Dolores. The lands on which SJSU is established was and continues to be a significant to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. We also recognize the ancestors of the Muwekma Ohlone constructed and maintained the 3 Bay Area missions. We also honor the military service of the Muwekma men and women who have honorably served overseas during World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, and who are still serving in the U.S. Armed Forces today. My name is Catherine Blackmore-Reyes, and along with Shane Curtin and Estela Inda, we thank you for joining us. All of you out there in Zoom land, and to those that trekked the heat to join us here in this Labor Day weekend. I want to thank the San Jose Public Library and the San Jose State University Library teams. There were many people involved, to name them. They have supported us through the exhibits and the programs. I thank the director of the California Room, Shane Curtin, and my colleague, SJSU librarian now, Estela Inda, the brainchild of this exhibit, for including me in this work and collaboration. Although it has been a lot of work, I look forward to the next project we do together. Or maybe that's just me. I recognize the financial support of SJPL and SJSU King Library and the grants from the American Library Association, the National Endowment of the Arts, and the Social Science Research Center that have helped fund the exhibit and programming. If you haven't had a chance to view the exhibit yet, it is on display until September 24th, so time is ticking. But I do know that there's plans to try to do some kind of online presentation, but we're working on that. The recording of our first panel is now available online if you missed it. I also want to thank our panelists, Professor Stephen Pitti, Josie Mendez Negrete, Alejandro Jara, and Arturo Villarreal joining us today. Remember that we do ask you to wear a mask during the presentation. The presenters will not be using when they're presenting and talking, but we do ask that you keep the mask during the whole duration of the panel. And finally, please take the time to fill out our surveys. They're sort of a yellowish form, and using the QR code on the survey will allow you to use the online survey survey option. I'll pass it to Shane.
Thank you. Hello, all. I'm Shane Curtin, and yes, so we'll have this panel event as well uploaded shortly. And also, just a reminder to anyone who we haven't already met in the audience that we're always looking for more East Side items to add to our collection. Always photography, especially, is the thing I love, but really anything, really trying to build up those items and, better reflect San Jose as a whole. So without further ado, I will introduce our library dean for the university from Florida in his 2nd year. Here you have Dean Mike Meth.
All right, welcome all. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Let me welcome you to the East Side's Impact on San Jose, a conversation with scholars. That's today's panel, and I want to introduce myself. My name is Mike Meth. As Shane said already, I'm actually also from Florida. That's where I was most recently, but I've been many places, so we'll get into that another time. But I'm the Dean of the San Jose State University King Library, and I'm very proud to be here. It's so wonderful to see so many of you here on a Saturday, especially a Saturday on a long weekend, and also so wonderful to have over 30 people online on Zoom. I think this is really spectacular and speaks to the impact of this exhibit that we have here and how groundbreaking it is. It wasn't so long ago, on July 9th, that we opened this exhibit up on the 5th floor, and if you haven't had a chance, I invite you to go up there. We had over 350 people in attendance. And with you today and the previous panel, and that opening event, and all the people that have come through since July 9th. We have had well over 1,000 people see this exhibit. And again, I think that is, to me, is a remarkable outcome. Thank you. I also love that when I am upstairs, every so often I try to take a look. I'm new to the city of San Jose. And so I find myself either perusing the exhibit a little bit or end up speaking with colleagues in special collections and archives. And I love hearing every so often I hear somebody like outside and they look at a poster or they see a sign, advertisement from a grocery store. They're like, oh, I used to shop there. I remember that. And I think this speaks to the impact that we have over here. And the emotional connections that our work in the libraries does for the city of San Jose. This magnificent and important exhibit shows really the power also of our combined SJSU and SJPL library. And I want to really highlight this. This building houses two sets of libraries really in it that operate as one library together. And you can see over there, Kathy, Shane, and also Estella, who kind of, as some of you know, has been on both sides, but is now on the SJSU side. And how our library then actually connects with the community, especially when we start joining together in our forces and we collect and share these stories of San Jose. And we do it in a way like few others can. As someone relatively new here, again, I've enjoyed learning about this rich and complex history and what the East Side has contributed to what currently the fabric of San Jose is and how the city looks and represents. When I again highlight Kathy, Shane, and Estella for this idea, you already heard this was in many ways Estella's idea. And I think it's wonderful that after a few years of delay, COVID, some of you might heard of it, we are here today to celebrate. I also want to extend a very special thank you and welcome to our four panelists. Three are joining us in the room today, and Stephen is online all the way from the East Coast, I believe. So thank you also to all of you for joining us here, and you will be more formally introduced in a little bit. Also a very special welcome to Councilmember Raul Perales. You will hear from him in a second. But the support of the city of this work is also outstanding. We're super grateful. Maybe we can pause for a second and just also acknowledge all of our speaker and honored guests. And then you already heard from Kathy very briefly. This work is also not possible without the financial support of NEH, which supports the American Library Association and the Social Sciences Research Council grants that have allowed us to put on this panel that allow us to work on the collections, to digitize the collections and make sure that they're going to be available in an enduring format for many generations to come after this generation is here to see it today. And I love seeing that we have a couple of children in the audience as well. So this is an intergenerational event. It's an intergenerational exhibit. And it is important that we document this and keep these stories alive and the stories going. So I'm going to invite you to please enjoy the panel. Take some time to tour the exhibits. We have the one here on the second floor. We have the one on the fifth floor. And also keep in touch with the library for future events. This is not the last one. There will be more. They might not be directly on the East Side Dreams, but you will see more events that we're organizing that are for our community. And Shane already mentioned this a little bit as well. If what you see today or what you hear today inspires you and you'd like to contribute, reach out to one of us. We are here. We're looking to make more connections. We know you have stories. We know you have items that maybe we can spur something. This whole exhibit came out of an inquiry about, do we have lowrider magazines? So you never know. A butterfly flaps its wings, and next thing you know, you have an East Side Dreams exhibit happening. So with all this being said, thank you again for joining us today, all of you, whether in person, whether you're online. So grateful to have you here. I look forward to learning from our panel. And I think I'll turn it back to Shane at this point. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. And now I'd like to hand it over to our very own District 3, Raul Perales. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes, you can come up, buddy. My son likes to join me. He's in training. Well, first off, good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here. My name is Raul Perales. I am the council representative for District 3 and all the surrounding neighborhoods, which includes San Jose State and King Library. And it's a pleasure of mine to be here with you today as well. I know when I first heard of East Side Stories being an exhibit here, I thought of the 12-volume vinyl records that my mother owned forever. And really that part of San Jose that has always been a part of my family. But what this has to offer today is so much more. And I'll tell you, it was a surprise to me that Estela was now with the San Jose State side. I just learned that today. So I'm bummed that we lost Estela. But yes, round of applause to Estela. We were here a number of years back pre-pandemic and really kicked off a partnership between me and the United Lowrider Council here in San Jose that Estela helped bring together, quite frankly. And it was standing here that I made a commitment that I would help to repeal our cruising ban. And we just celebrated that on Wednesday. And so and in fact, one of those signs, I'm bummed that it's not here yet, but we're going to try to get it to hopefully tomorrow, Monday, if it's not here already. So we're going to try to get you one by Monday so it can be in the exhibit. One of the signs my office has made sure is coming here to King Library. So I know that might be news to you today. So, but it's coming here. So, so that'll be a part of your exhibit. And, you know, the history of the East Side was largely left untold by media, scholars, and it wasn't really until late last century that the stories began to be chronicled. And what we have is an opportunity today with 4 scholars, and I'll also mention a bummer, but Dr. Stephen Petey, and as you might recall, Doctor, we had partnered with the Hammer Theater, also another partnership like the library here between the city and San Jose State. He was set to come here in March of 2020 in person to have a conversation, much like today. Unfortunately, that all got called off. But so a long time overdue, Doctor, but I'm happy to have you here today and excited about the education that this panel is going to help bring. But beyond that, as you've already heard, you have an opportunity, our entire community has an opportunity to come to the California Room here in King Library and be able to learn about our history here locally, learn about things like the East Side, learn about things like cruising and our lowrider culture here in San Jose. And to me, I think that it's just so terrific to have that opportunity in our libraries here for our entire community to embrace. When we were able to celebrate, and I was personally able to take down the last cruising ban sign on Wednesday and celebrating community, we made history here in San Jose. And it's the library here, why it was so important for me that they have one of those signs. It's the library here that's going to help tell that stories for decades to come. Stories sometimes about our past that we're not so proud of. The discrimination that has existed, the racism that has existed, and sometimes just the untold stories. And so I'm proud that you pulled this together, the partnership between San Jose State, King Library, the City of San Jose Library staff. So thank you to all of you. One more round of applause to our staff for making this happen. And enjoy your panel today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Councilman Perales and Dean Mike. And now for why we're here. I just want to mention we are limited on the chairs that can be in this room. So if you're standing or need a seat, please use the seats that are available. We can't bring any more chairs into this room. So Steve, since you're not here, we actually have a very nice filled room. So that's amazing. And thank you all for coming. I appreciate all of you being here today and joining us in person. So I welcome our panelists and Arturo Villarreal, who is the moderator for this panel, and we'll introduce them. Professor Villarreal is a graduate of SJSU. He teaches at Evergreen Valley College and is the author of Manuel Gonzalez, Apache Mayor of San Jose, California, and the co-author of the book Mexicans in San Jose. Please welcome and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, thank you. And yeah, it's an honor and pleasure to be here. And what I'd like to do now is to introduce the panelists. Beginning with Stephen Petey, PhD, is a professor of history, American studies, and ethnicity, race, and migration at Yale University. He is the author of The Devil in Silicon Valley, Race, Mexican Americans, and Northern California, and other works on Chicano history and historiography. He will be joining us virtually. Next, to my far left, we have Alejandro J. Jara, PhD, is a scholar of Western and Latin American history and the author of Do You Know the Way to San Jose? Ethnic Mexicans, Urbanism, Culture, and Politics in the Emerging Silicon Valley, 1940-1980. And last but not least, to my left, Josie Mendez Negrete. Oh, yeah. PhD, is a professor emerita of the University of Texas at San Antonio, founder and publisher of Conocimiento Press, and the author of 3 books, including
San Jose is in my throat too with my emotions. Before the barrio was wrecked to link Highway 101 with the 680 and the 280, a few blocks away from the Community Services Organization, CSO, where I once worked. Sal Si Puedes and its mudsliding streets without sidewalks became my barrio, where I avoided potholes on my short walks to weekly catechism at the old Guadalupe Church on Camera Street, now relocated and named McDonald Hall in honor of Father Donald. As a 6th grader, I attended Lee Matson, now named Cesar Chavez Elementary, in recognition of the child who, with his family, moved to San Jose in the 1930s, the activist leader who grew up to revolutionize farm worker rights. In that barrio, it wasn't only language that made us feel at home. We shared a common culture and saw ourselves in each other. In Sal Si Puede, I felt welcome, especially when Mr. Smith recognized my love of books, gifting me a copy of Gulliver's Travels to inspire my reading. Even when my language skills were limited, I could hardly speak 10 words of English. The East Side became the place to which we returned, but our tenancy was not always permanent. We lived on Geraldine and Candler Streets until we got on the #1 slot on Section 8 and the family moved to Mount Fraser. Then that house sold and my brother and sister-in-law and mother bought a house on Elm Rock near White. They now live in the East Foothills. My husband, who was born in Compton, California, and lived in the greater LA area until the age of 18 when he came to Stanford, dubbed Sal Si Puedes the Disneyland of barrios. As he saw it, San Jose's poor neighborhood were unlike those with which he was familiar. As most of us, he did not realize that Sal Si Puedes had been established in 1911 or that it was an entry point for migrants and immigrants employed in canneries and agriculture. Kathy Chavez Napoli, a self-made millionaire and 3rd-generation resident of San Jose, and Anthony Soto, who proudly claimed his ranch in Arizona tradition, also lived in Sal Si Puedes among the 23 people that I interviewed and whose life histories I collected. Kathy and her family lived on Summer Street in a 4-bedroom house remodeled by her father. When the freeway came through, she said there was no fair market value and the city relied on eminent domain to push us out. To connect the highway, homeowners were underpaid for the houses, and when the city took their properties, all got the same buyout regardless of size and upkeep. Unhappy with the process, Kathy's father took the case to court, but he lost the fight. And from having lived in a home that was completely paid off, he got into debt with a 2-bedroom house that was all the family could afford. In our pláticas, Chavez Napoli linked her activism and involvement with her family's forced relocation. In her own body, she knew what it was like to be displaced. Then when city government condemned the Guadalupe Azuris neighborhood to build a convention center, urban renewal reared its ugly head when city officials contemplated extending eminent domain to where her parents lived. Kathy didn't think her parents could survive another displacement, a second relocation. So she asked her parents if they went to the studio theater. And with their yes, Kathy took the lead to preserve the space as a way of fighting for her parents when there was no one else for them. Born into an educated family with economic means, Anthony Soto's family migrated from Arizona to Salsipuedes, residing there for about 2 years. Soto say they lived in a house with a very small lot, a small kitchen, a dining room, a living room, and 1 bedroom. When he was ordained as a Catholic priest, Father Soto returned to the East Side. At Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish, he worked with youth in the Cursillo movement, a movement that prepared activist leaders for San Jose. A co-founder of the Chicano priests that included Father Casey, Jim McEntee, Reynaldo Flores, and a few others, mostly Anglos, they congregated at Sacred Heart Church to figure out ways to work in Chicano communities because the San Francisco diocese failed to meet the need of the parishes in San Jose. After leaving the priesthood, but still invested in the spiritual life of the community, Soto and his wife Phyllis Armas organized La Comunidad, a grassroots alternative to the traditional church, where women were leaders and participants in spreading teachings that focused on human rights. It was never the group's intent to replace the institution. Rather, it was to create a spiritual path for those who didn't go to church. Historically, San Jose has had an invested community of activists who toil for its betterment, and residents of San Jose's East Side community continue to fight for their rights, struggling against houselessness, securing a living wage for workers, fighting for educational rights, and creating employment access. Salsipuedes Mayfair is still an entry point for those who move to San Jose. Despite past practices of covenant clauses and redlining that protect housing and rentals in exclusive communities, as buyers and tenants are redirected to poor neighborhoods. The East Side of San Jose is alive with hope and desire for change. And presently in Salsipuedes, Somos Mayfair inspires a new generation of activist leaders who carry the banner for social justice and social change. Toward that end, they build leadership and nurture resident-based solutions as they seek and secure resources for their community. My return to the East Side appears to be closer. My husband and I bought the house we could have purchased in the mid-70s that had we qualified for a loan. After living in San Antonio for nearly 30 years, and let me tell you, it's really hot there, and now retired despite warning against the cost of living and the experience and the expensive real estate, I can't wait to return home. The place where the city council, and thank you, council member, recently and unanimously repealed an unjust law imposed on the East Side in 1992 against the expression of culture through law writing. Although some may see this as a small victory, I cried when I heard the news and imagined my friends, Paul and Emma Bellomini and other lawwriters celebrating that justice had been done. I hope to have inspired each one of you to write and document one of the many stories you've heard about the East Side. One community, one family, one person, or one situation at a time. The stories are there to be told, and I gave you multiple hints. Thank you for your attention. Que viva San Jose Seaside, Sanjo por siempre.
Beautiful. So next, we'd like to get into the panel discussion. And I'd like to direct the first question to Alex. What is your connection to East San Jose, and what inspired you to write about it?
That was a very beautiful poem and very heartwarming. Thank you, Arturo. So I actually do not have a direct connection to the East Side. I grew up in the Cambrian Park neighborhood, predominantly white, and I actually had more of a resonance with the Washington neighborhood. I grew up going to Sacred Heart Church on Willow, and so I grew up just always hearing about and recognizing that the East Side was kind of the Mexican part of town, and I didn't live there. And I grew up kind of surrounded by white people and always felt out of place. My family was the only Latino family in the neighborhood. And so one of the things that inspired me to write about San Jose was tracing my own historical background in the city and looking at other pockets of the city where Latinos were living, predominantly kind of focusing in on the Washington neighborhood. My dissertation actually focuses on, right, the development of the East Side, but also the development of the Washington neighborhood, because it's important to note that prior to the East Side becoming what it was, there was actually a thriving Latino community from the 30s throughout the 1970s near the downtown area. And those are other stories that are forgotten and that are overlooked, right? And so, although I don't have a direct connection to the East Side, I just always knew that that's where the cultural heart of the Latino community was in San Jose. And when I went to college, it was very frustrating for me to try to learn about Mexican-American history, to learn about Chicano history, and always having to read about Los Angeles, always having to read about San Antonio, always having to read about other places where Latinos lived, very much knowing that there was a thriving Latino community here in San Jose. And so when I went to pursue my master's degree and later my PhD, I wanted to write about my city. I wanted to write about where I was from, so I could put San Jose on the map, so I could inspire other scholars to continue to write about San Jose the ways in which other scholars have written about cities like Los Angeles. Oftentimes people do not know that San Jose is the 10th largest city in the country, and it's highly overlooked as a place of scholarly work, predominantly as it pertains to ethno-racial minorities like Latinos and Mexicanos. So that's my kind of contribution.
Stephen, would you please address the same question? What is your connection to East San Jose and what inspired you to write about it?
Thanks for the question, Arturo, and hello to everybody. I'm sorry, really sorry I'm not there in person. And thank you, Josie and Alex, for all of your words so far. I grew up in Sacramento. I was in and out of San Jose as a kid, but was not firmly established in any way on the East Side until really I went to graduate school at Stanford. This was in the 1990s. And it was when I was at Stanford, kind of living, you know, in the general Palo Alto area, that I got to know the East Side better. And it was, as many of you will remember, you know, a tough time, you know, locally in the region, but, you know, throughout the state and the nation. There was a lot of, it was a time of Proposition 187 and 209 and 227. Latinos were under attack, and I was quite frustrated both with the atmosphere I was living in at Stanford, and you know, that part of the Bay Area, and also frustrated about the ways that Latinos were being treated. And so I came to the East Side with those frustrations and wanted to write about the place in the hope of addressing many of the things that Alex and Josie have already addressed. The dignity of these communities, their longstanding struggles, and the hardships that people continue to face into the late 20th century.
Thank you. Josie, would you like to address this question?
When I went back to school, this is after quitting at West Valley College, because the education I was receiving in the late 60s was irrelevant to me. You know, they wanted me to become a bilingual secretary, so by that time I could be a bilingual secretary. And I wanted to pursue university education. So I didn't have the support, and I began to research different things, different stories. And, you know, one person who wrote about our community, the Black Berets, is sitting right here to my right. Exciting things. But most of the research that I did at that particular time spoke with what was then called a theory of poverty, blaming people for their own mistakes. And all the written material on Mexicans was that they were at fault for what they were living or experiencing because they were lazy, dumb, stupid, and they didn't want to be educated. And so we had scholars who were doing research, but they were coming to our community in the East Side to harvest and cultivate the information, take it back and misrepresent us. So there was Raza narratives, but it was Raza narratives from a very Anglo-dominant, biased, classist perspective. And so I decided that our story was more complex than that, and that we needed to tell our own stories. And I wasn't encouraged, I wasn't supported. And it wasn't until I went to the University of California, Santa Cruz, that we began to give credence to the importance of documenting the experience of Mexican Americans, and that it wasn't a faux pas to research yourself and to write your own stories, because the expectation then was that we had to be objective and detached and professional. And that meant you couldn't study yourself, which was a bunch of bunk. So I'll stop right there.
Thank you very much for that. Stephen, I'd like for you to address question number 2 first. How did national forces such as redlining, the Bracero program, etc., help lay the groundwork for the East Side's political awakening?
Thanks for the question. You know, it's a complicated question. And as I was thinking about this in advance, you know, it occurred to me, I think we probably should establish first what we mean by awakening, right? Alex already mentioned this in his remarks, that there, you know, was significant political organizing and political activism in the San Jose area well in advance of say the 1950s and the 1960s. And, you know, one of the things I explored in my work was 19th century political activism among Mexicans and Mexican Americans and other Latinos, including Chilenos. So I have some reluctance about the term awakening. It kind of, you know, implies, as also Josie was just, you know, suggesting, that people had been asleep before, and then they kind of woke up. And there's something very, you know, I think inadvertently discriminatory in the terminology if we're not careful. But I will say that I think that, you know, it's clear that the East Side certainly generated lots and lots of political organizing energy and activity after World War II. And so if we think about that period, I suppose in some ways we could call it some kind of a surge of political activity. Before this period of the late 1940s and the 1950s, I think the community had been much more transient than it would be later. There were fewer formal institutions on the East Side itself that gathered people together. There was deep economic poverty, and it was largely an immigrant community in the years prior to World War II. Now, even then, before the 1940s and 50s, there was politics, including radical politics there. There were mutual aid organizations, there were wildcat strikes happening in fields and canneries. There was involvement in Mexican transnational political activity. But after the war, I think people did become much more active politically on the East Side. And I, you know, in thinking this through, I guess I would suggest there might have been 5 or 6 broad reasons for why that happened in roughly the 1950s. First, I think people began spending more and more people began spending more and more time in East San Jose after World War II. The community was growing. The Bracero program allowed agricultural growers throughout the state who had once been hiring East San Jose residents to seasonal jobs throughout the state in agriculture, to hire fewer of them and to instead hire contracted braceros in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. So more and more of those people began to spend more and more in East San Jose, began to spend more time year round in the San Jose area and not go out to the Central Valley or go to Salinas or go to the Imperial Valley or elsewhere to work. So that's one, I think, you know, important dimension, is that there is a kind of gathering of people and a growth of the community. Some of this is also driven, as was suggested by Josie, by things like redlining and other restrictions that kept Mexicanos and Mexican Americans from moving to many other parts of the city. And so East San Jose is just growing. And with that come Spanish language newspapers and radio shows and other things. So culture and community are growing together. So I guess that would be one thing I would say for, you know, a broad force driving the political moment of the immediate post-war period. The second, I guess, might be there's a new focus in this era, in this period, on equality, on political equality, on the abolition of racial and economic discrimination in the United States, in these years of economic growth in the United States generally after 1945. Remember that the United States is coming out of the Depression, and there's lots of focus in these years of the late 40s and early 50s on the rise of a middle class, all this language about equality. We know that's a lot of rhetoric in many cases, but it's out there in politics. There's new suburbs that are emerging in the San Jose area and elsewhere with great sidewalks, right? Fancy new public schools, grassy lawns, and so forth. And so in this kind of context, people begin to ask questions, equality-based questions. You know, what about San Jose, East San Jose, rather? Why is there this sharp distinction between the lived experiences of residents at East San Jose and people in other parts of the county? So that might be number two. Number three, I might point to the new expectations of Mexicans and Mexican Americans in this period who had themselves gone through wartime. You know, they'd been part of the World War II generation. And like African Americans and others in the United States, in the aftermath of World War II, people began to ask these questions about equality. They had fought against fascism abroad. Many of them had thought that they were fighting for freedom and equality at home. And in returning to the home front or living on the home front in the years after World War II, they raised hard questions and made real critiques of the inequality they found in East San Jose. Some of them, you know, really expressed a new citizenship politics that may or may not have always been about being a US citizen, but it was more about being a member of a community. And so there's this sense in East San Jose of the late 40s and throughout the 50s of being a member of a place based on your residency in the neighborhood. Again, you don't have to necessarily be a US citizen, but you're part of the East Side. And Josie, I think, was referring to this a little bit in terms of a sense of a common culture that's emerging in this period. And I think that is tied up with a kind of post-World War II generation of people who feel that they're a dignified group of people who deserve rights in this period. You know, my fourth of five big causes might be that I think in this period there are new key institutions in the San Jose area that are paying attention to the East Side and paying attention to Mexican Americans, Chicanos, in this period. In the years before the 1940s, there were much fewer big institutions that were paying attention to our communities. But after World War II, institutions like the Catholic Church, and again, Josie mentioned the Crucillo movement, be a slightly later example of this, begin to pay much more attention to what's going on with Mexican Americans and to express concern about Mexican American well-being. Labor unions as well. There's more care from labor unions in the 40s and 50s than there had been in, say, the 20s and the 30s. Labor unions in the post-World War II period weren't always particularly friendly towards Mexicans and Mexican Americans, but I think they were less racist and less xenophobic than they had been in the years immediately before World War II. And so you do see people like, you know, Father Donald McDonald and other members of the mission band, Catholic priests, who are working on behalf of the East Side and other similar communities. And then my final suggestion is that what underlay the kind of the politics of the period was also the development of a Mexican American civil rights movement, the development of a Mexican American civil rights movement, not just in San Jose, but elsewhere in the United States during this period. In East San Jose, we certainly see that happening. You know, I think the most important organization in the post-war period really was the Community Service Organization, which takes off in East San Jose in the early 1950s. And that organization is tied up with political developments among Chicanos in other parts of the country. It's connected with politics in Chicago. It's connected, the CSO is connected to East Los Angeles and efforts there to elect Mexican American officials. It's connected also to mutual aid organizations and mutual aid efforts among Mexican Americans throughout this period and before. It's connected to the Catholic Church. It's connected to anti-communism. It's connected to women's activism in the late 40s and early 50s and the activism of Mexican American in particular. So in many ways, these kinds of things, I think, defined or kind of set the stage for the political activism that would emerge in the 1940s and 50s. I could say more about the 60s and 70s, but I think I'll stop there and turn it over to other people. Thanks, Arturo.
Thank you, Stephen. Alejandro?
I'm not sure what else to say. I think you covered everything, but yeah, I think when I read the question, one of the things that kind of struck me was right that the way the question was posed, right, that there's these national forces, and right, the question asks, right, how do these national forces lay the groundwork? And I don't think that the forces lay the groundwork. People lay the groundwork. People do the effort. People do the work. And it's actually right, these national policies and these national laws that actually set the conditions that create right inequality, that create a sense of not belonging, that then people respond to. This is the 1930s. This map was drawn in 1939 from the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which surveyed over 200 cities in the United States. And this is kind of where you get the term redlining. More often than not, you have that term in reference to African Americans, Black Americans, and how they were discriminated against and how they were not allowed to live in particular cities or in particular towns. This is right the redlined map of San Jose. San Jose never had a very large Black community. And so what you see in all the areas that are marked in red, those are actually a lot of areas where there were Latinos, where there were Mexican Americans living, also Asian Americans. During the late 1930s, you also have Europeans that are not necessarily considered to be white during the time. So a lot of these areas, when you look at the descriptions, it says this is a mixed race neighborhood where you have Portuguese people, you have Slavic people, you have Italian people. And so it's important to note, right, that redlining didn't just affect African Americans or Black Americans, but it also separated people of it also separated other ethno-racial minorities. And in particular in San Jose, it impacted Latinos the most. If you look at kind of the top right, what I did in my work was try to see how, right, an issue like redlining impacted the segregation in San Jose. So the two neighborhoods that I looked at, right, were kind of the east side. And so you can kind of see that the east side really wasn't a part of San Jose during the late 1930s and 1940s. It's not even on the map, right? You have a very small corner. You only have two small neighborhoods, right, that are kind of considered to be part of the city during that time. That area that I call El Ganso is in reference to what was an Italian neighborhood referred to as Goosetown during the time. By the late 1950s, you have an influx, though, of Mexican Americans, Mexican immigrants that are residing in the downtown area. And so you can say that by the 1970s, right, the area wouldn't be called El Ganso anymore, but it was called, or it wasn't called Goosetown, but you could refer to it as El Ganso because whites were moving out of the area and you had Latinos moving into the area. So this is a map from the late 1930s. If you go to the next map. So this was in 1939. If you go to the second map. So this is a map from 1950. And as you can see, those two areas, right, the east side is still, right, predominantly not part of the city. And then you have in the central area of the city, you have those little orange spots. Those are neighborhoods that were considered to be Latino neighborhoods. This map is taken from the 1950 census. There were over 52 census tracts that were taken. And there were 14 out of those census tracts that were marked as Latino neighborhoods. Those 14 tracts were documented as having 250 or more Spanish surnamed people living in those neighborhoods. And these are only about 7 of them, but the majority, right, there's only 3 that are located in what would have been the east side, and the rest of them were actually located along First Street in downtown. So when you talk about people doing the work, although you do not have people officially living in the city, right, there are people living on the east side. And as Stephen Petey kind of pointed out, right, those communities are more transient. Those are more farm working people that are coming in and out to work in the canneries or working agricultural fields kind of in the northern part of the county in cities like Mountain View, Sunnyvale. But you have a settled community living in San Jose in the 1950s, and they're very much a middle class. And as a middle class, right, kind of part of this growing middle class across the country, they view themselves as being part of the general US society. And they see themselves as being active participants and active members of the city. And so the political groundwork actually comes from this awakening, this realization that they're part of the middle class and that they need to assert their rights and that they actually deserve the equality that comes with, right, being a US citizen. Again, as Professor Pease mentioned, in the 1950s, you have people who are coming back from World War II. You have people who are coming back from working in war industries. And as being part of the war effort, they view themselves very much as being part of the general US society, as being part of the country. And when you have places not allowing you to eat in the restaurant, when you have places that are denying people to be buried in their cemeteries, there's this desire to fight against that. And so I think it's important, right? Just to kind of reiterate what I stated, that people lay the groundwork, people do the work, and it's government policies and it's government laws that set the conditions for people to respond to addressing inequality. And if you go just to the very last map, again, right here, you kind of see what the East Side grows to. This is a census map from the 1980s, or from 1980. And so you can see that the population of Latinos in the downtown area and the center of San Jose doesn't really grow as much after 1970, and it kind of maintains its population. But the size of the East Side geographically and even in numbers grows tremendously from 1950 to 1980. Thank you.
As I'm listening to my two colleagues, what emerges for me are the wisdom and the consciousness and the awareness that many of the people in my study, and I'm talking about the 23 whose oral histories were contributed, is that they grew up in families where they engage an oppositional discourse with the dominant class that basically said they had no value, they had no worth, they were no one. And what they had is parents who came here right after the revolution or were here right around that time and taught their children to value their culture and to value their language and to learn to respect others, so that we have people like Esther Medina, whose father organized Fiestas Patrias before there was a Fiestas Patrias in San Jose. And we're talking about the 30s and 40s. And so there was cultural activism, and it was based on the consciousness and the belief that they were equal and not unequal to anybody, that they were equal citizens and that they had the right to be who they were. So people like Jack Brito, who actually, believe it or not, was imparted religious teachings by his parents. Sofia Mendoza, whose father believed that wealth was to distribute for everybody. It shouldn't just be for those people who are wealthy and can amass resources. And Edina Garcia, whose parents taught them to respect themselves and their culture and to not allow themselves to be mistreated or to be derided because they spoke Spanish or because they look different. And so what we have with both Depression generation people I talked to and the baby boomer generation is that they were taught to value themselves and to find worth and merit in their culture so they can struggle against the expectations by the dominant society about who they were and they could be in society. So there's more to say, but I think that we can't forget that besides the national decisions about what was going to be done in San Jose, there were activist people setting up businesses. There were activist people organizing themselves behind the banner of culture. I don't know if you know this, but the Cinco de Mayo was ever first celebrated in San Jose by the silver miners who were celebrating the victory of Benito Juarez against, against the French. And so we're having Cinco de Mayo celebrations, which is truly a Chicano celebration. Mexico doesn't celebrate it, but they were celebrating it here. And the people that I talked to and interviewed in the histories I collected basically gave me that information to be able to see that there was a lot of wealth and a lot of consciousness about being a people who had merit, who had value, who had worth, and who deserved to be treated as equals.
Josie, I'd like for you to address question number 3 first. How did different generations with different political styles and beliefs come together to effect change in San Jose? And what were the points of unity and disunity?
I can give you sex and gender analysis, and I can give you a class analysis. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you that the point of unity was winning the struggle, whatever the struggle was. And the differences were negotiated, behind the screen. I think that where it was most visible was between men and women. The men, always in front, the men wanting to lead all the movements, and the women doing all the work behind them. Okay, we know that story, I think. And so what happened is that the women got really strategically creative to get things done and be okay with letting the men take credit if they wanted to. So that was one, that was the sex gender difference. I think that probably when the unions began to include Mexicans, the fight was more around who the CIO and who were identified as communists because of their involvement. So that was a big pleito, and to the point of that they targeted people who were activists in the community, like Jose J. Alvarado, who was a DJ and who was an enterprise and an empresario and former, was married to Blanca Alvarado. And so there were differences, and those who were aspiring middle-class people, so it's a class analysis, right, decided to go after Jose and go after him because they accused him of being a communist for his beliefs. So those kind of ideologies were tainting the activism and the leadership that people took on, but it wasn't so to the point that it prevented progress or disallowed people from getting work done. I'll stop right there because I think he has something to say. I see him taking notes.
Thank you. So I think it's important to note that when we look at different generations, I think it's common in the scholarship to see that there's the first generation or the immigrant generation that practiced polite politics, right? They believed in the American dream. Oftentimes, they try to work within the system, right? Try to register people to vote, try to impact local politics, try to impact national politics by participating in ways that were accepted, right, by larger society. But then what you have with the second generation, you have the Chicano generation, where people are a little more disillusioned with the American dream. I think there's recognition that there's flaws in the American dream and that the American dream isn't necessarily meant for everyone, that people are excluded from participating or having a piece of the American dream. And so they take a more activist approach, or they take a more confrontational approach. And so there's somewhat of a disunity there because you have people that are not necessarily agreeing on which approach to take. And oftentimes that led to clashes here in San Jose with organizations talking badly about other Latino organizations, right? So there's, Latinos are not a homogenous group, just like any other group. And so there's disunity and there's disjunction. There's different approaches to attack problems. And people do not always necessarily agree. We're not a monolith. We're not one particular thing. And so our history is a lot more complicated than that. And so when we look at the different approaches that different generations take at addressing issues, I think it's important to keep that in mind, right? Not everyone is a Democrat, not everyone's a Republican. There's people in the middle, and it's okay to have those dislocations. It's okay to have that disunity, because in having that disunity, we actually insert ourselves into society. And the one other thing that I kind of want to say is that, well, there's a lot of things I can say, but I think it's important to note, though, that despite having these disconnects, as Josie was mentioning, culture was always the one thing that kind of brought people together. You mentioned the Fiestas Patrias. It didn't matter if you were first generation, second generation, or third generation. The Fiestas Patrias on September 16th and Cinco de Mayo always brought people together, and they brought people downtown. And what's important to note about the Fiestas Patrias here in San Jose is that although they were cultural celebrations, there were also very much political activities as well. More often than not, city council members were invited to participate in the Fiestas Patrias. There was the large parades that happened downtown, but then there was always a banquet that occurred afterwards, and local politicians were invited to participate in the parade. They were invited as guests of honor at the banquets, and it wasn't just local politicians. There was representatives from the federal government. President Nixon sent some of his representatives to the Fiestas Patrias in the 1970s. There was governors that participated. There was other city council members from other cities that would come to participate in the Fiestas Patrias here in San Jose. And so I think it's important to note that these cultural celebrations were also sites of political activism. It was a way to let the city, let the state know that Latinos are here, that we have a presence. And I think politicians took note of that and would go to these celebrations as a way of trying to show their face so that when election time came around, people would notice that they were there, right? And so it was a way for Latinos to insert themselves into kind of the local politics. So that was just kind of one thing that I wanted to mention.
Thank you. Stephen, same question.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you know, the general thrust of what's already been said. You know, what I'm hearing in my co-panelists' responses is a kind of argument for continuity across generations and across you know, across periods in general about the politicization of culture and so forth. And I think I made and would continue to make a similar argument that, you know, although there's lots of differences in any given period, if we want to think broadly about Latino, Chicano, Mexican American politics on the East Side and more broadly in the region, I do think there's a lot of continuity over time. I think one of the things that you see over time is an insistence on rejecting the kind of myths around what the kind of myths of equality, or the Valley of Heart's Delight, or Silicon Valley, this kind of the boosterism that has long shaped the area. And I think East Siders and Latinos throughout the region have consistently pushed back and called BS on that over time. And I think that's been very important. I think that over time, there has been an insistence on the importance and the dignity of culture in these communities. What culture, what the Fiestas Patrias did and meant in the 1860s and the 1920s and the 1990s might be slightly different, I think, and who attended and how that was mobilized, but culture is there in all of these periods. In the 1950s, there was a kind of celebration of Latino culture on the radio, which goes beyond Mexico. People are quite into, mambo and other things, which are not Mexican, but they claim that as Mexican culture, and that's so things certainly change. So I would say culture is a continuity. I think there's an insistence on labor, a kind of labor politics at the heart of a lot of East Side politics over time, which is to say that whether we're talking about, the importance of farm workers or cannery workers or domestic workers or construction workers or, high-tech assembly workers in the 80s and the 90s, justice for janitors, the people have paid a lot of attention to the importance of the rights of working people and the ways in which the economic mistreatment of immigrant and non-immigrant people in the region, many of them East Siders, has been really foundational. The last thing I would say is I think that there's been the kind of last continuity is I think there's also been an insistence on coalitional politics. And this is where I think we can kind of get into a trap if we're not careful. And I think, Alex, you were in some way gesturing towards this point. San Jose is a enormously important Mexican American Chicano city, Latino city, but it's not only a Latino city. And over time, people on the East Side interacted in really important ways with Italians, with Cape Verdeans, with many others, with African Americans. And I think that while these members of these communities certainly pushed Mexican-American politics, and they, in the ways that I think have been said, there was also this recurring interest in gathering with other people who shared similar ideas about the importance of addressing inequality, opening up opportunity, getting the street paved, having better experiences for our kids in schools, all those kinds of things that did bring people together with other communities. And especially when it came to electoral politics, candidates could rarely rely, at least until maybe they can a little bit more in the recent past, but historically could rarely rely only on Mexican-American voters to get them elected to local or state office. They had to work with other communities. They had to motivate other voters and convince them that they were speaking broadly for the good of neighborhoods and so forth. So I think that coalitional politics, again, it's gone up and down like a lot of things, but I think it's been a through line, a kind of continuous theme over time as well.
Thanks, Stephen. Josie, you wanted to add to this?
One of the things that my colleagues and I as historians, I call myself a social historian, is that we unearthed and made visible the histories of our people, so that no longer can we be cast aside and put in the background, because we know who we are. And I think that not doing it to tap us on the shoulders, but we need to continue doing that. You know, the struggle for ethnic studies, the inclusion for ethnic studies. We're talking here in 2022, but in the early to mid 60s, Sofia Mendoza was walking out middle school students to fight for representations in the school and to have Chicano content in the cultural classes and the reading classes and all the assignments that they had. And then we had Ernestina Garcia fighting for, and I'm talking about people from the Depression generation that I call, fighting for bilingual education services and professional areas so that people will not be devalued and depreciated. So for me, the coalitional politics is important, but we need to understand that knowing our history and telling our history is what counts. When I wrote the poem, I'm telling you about Chemo Candelaria because he reflects the indigenous part of East San Jose. He's Chumash, okay, and he was a curandero. When I talked to you about Jesse and Henry Dominguez, they were activists in the community who fought against the KJ spread of, crystal meth, what we call now. And I talked to you about Lorna D. Cervantes because she was from San Jose, East San Jose and the West Side as well. So, the whole San Jose can claim her. And when I give you the names of, the Jackson Kings, that was a social club that was persecuted because they were perceived as gang members. Somebody needs to bring up that history, the Chicana Coalition, youth getting together, the UFW East Side Organizing Committee, which politically stood to the left of the UFW, but they supported the struggle of the UFW, and there is a story to be told there. So the reason that I'm naming all of these people and naming all of the struggles, Chela Sandoval, an amazing scholar, she was from East San Jose. I want us to make visible who we are and to continue digging and picking up the stories so that we can tell our children and our grandchildren who we are without people erasing us from the map. So if you're not fighting for ethnic studies, I hope you're thinking about it.
Thank you, Josie. Thank you, Josie. Alejandro, I'd like you to address question number 4 first, please. How did the East Side's culture both draw from and influence the culture of the city at large?
So the way the question's posed, right? How did the East Side's culture, right, kind of both draw from and influence the city? I think the better question is how did Latinos, how did ethnic Mexicans, right? Because again, ethnic Mexicans, Latinos in the city do not just reside in the east side, they reside throughout the entire city. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And so I think the question is, how did Latinos impact city life? How did Latinos impact culture here in San Jose? And I think it's important to note that prior to the east side kind of becoming what it was, right, kind of really solidifying itself as the heart of the Latino community here in San Jose, right, with kind of the establishment of the Mexican Heritage Plaza in the 1990s, right, kind of really solidifying that as a cultural space, that downtown was a thriving area for Latinos. There were Latino businesses. There were white Anglo businesses that employed Latinos. Spanish was spoken on the streets. There was Latino music playing through the streets on a daily basis, right? The community right off of First Street, as I mentioned, right, with regards to the neighborhoods where Latinos live, was very much in the downtown area. And so when we talk about how Latinos have impacted culture, we've always been a part of the San Jose culture. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, that we've never been separate. We've always been a part of San Jose. But the thing is that whether or not we've been recognized by larger society as a part is the different, right? It's the different perspective. But we've always been here. We've always contributed to culture as a whole. I think there's been a shift over the last maybe 20 years or so, where having Latino celebrations in the downtown area, having Latino celebrations throughout the cities, right? Not just here in San Jose, but throughout the country, is now something that's viewed as a positive thing, right? It wasn't always necessarily viewed that way by Anglo, by kind of the majority. But now it's viewed as something that actually enriches city life, and people are attracted to what we bring to cities with regards to our food, with regards to our music, with regards to even the style of clothes that we wear. And so I think it's just important to note that I think Latinos have always participated and have always been a part of the culture. But I think people are starting to recognize it more. And a part of that has to do with the fact that there's such a shift in the demographics in the country, and that there are just more Latinos that can appreciate the culture that we contribute to US society.
Thank you, Alejandro. Excuse me, Josie? Same
Defer
question.
to Steve.
Okay, Stephen?
I'm not sure I have much to add to Alex's excellent answer, Arturo, to be honest.
I nailed it.
It's okay. I'm an academic. I can't not talk. As I'm looking at the activist leaders in the front cover of my book who are departed, I don't know if you can see it, but this was on purpose and by design. If you play Chinese checkers, okay, that's a Chicano checkers board. And what you have is Chicanas, okay, winning the war. Okay, I don't know if you could see that. If you don't have the book, buy it so you can analyze it. Okay, so as I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the amazing contributions that Mike Garcia, who was my ahijado de matrimonio, I was his, I was there for his marriage to Gloria and his madrina. And he went to San Jose State University. He became an amazing leader and co-founder of Justice for Janitors here, got arrested, did all kinds of stuff to promote the work of undocumented workers in San Jose. The first ever place in the United States that did that. Somebody needs to write that story. Jose Villa, who fought against police brutality and who took on the city on the Denny Treviño killing back in the 70s, early 70s. All these people made amazing contributions to, and they have a story to tell that needs to be read. So my point here is that the city of San Jose, I don't think has begun to take note of the value that our presence in this community has made to agriculture, to manufacturing, to creating wealth. I think that we're perceived as the worker bees, but not the people that made others wealthy as a result of our contributions. Somebody needs to knock in la cabeza and remind them that we're here and they're there and that they're wealthy because of the contributions that we have made. The That's all I have to say. Because the other stuff that follows are gonna be bad words, and my mother told me not to use them.
Thank you for not using the bad words, Josie. So, Stephen, I'd like for you to begin by addressing question number 5. What do you think is the most important moment in the political evolution of the East Side?
Whew, another great question and a hard question. I don't think I can actually tell you one moment that's the most important moment in the political evolution of the East Side, but let me give you 3 quick ones that might help to chart some of the changes over the, or in recent decades. Moment number 1 might be the establishment of the community service organization in Mayfair, at the Mayfair School in June of 1952. At that meeting, at the organizational meeting, 130 ethnic Mexicans were present, and they voted to establish a CSO chapter, and they elected Edman Gallegos as their president. That meeting and its organization also launched Cesar Chavez's career, as many people know, and the careers of many other local organizers on the East Side of various generations. It established an organization that got very involved in voter registration efforts that shifted the political landscape of the county, citizenship drives, a drive for pensions for undocumented members of the community who were of retirement age, efforts to drive a new legislative agenda in Sacramento through lobbying, and a kind of training of a generation of leaders that I think you could arguably point to that meeting in June 1952 if you have to have one moment that kind of opened that up in San Jose. So that would be moment 1. Moment 2 might be, roughly 17 years later, in 1969. Both the kind of summer and fall of 1969, which is a very, exciting, dramatic period of time in the country, in the world, and certainly in San Jose. In San Jose saw 2 major events in that period of the summer and fall of 1969, as I see them. The first was what was called the Fiesta de las Rosas parade, and the second was what's been referred to as the Justice Chargan incident. So in the Fiesta de las Rosas parade, this was a public parade that the city of San Jose decided to organize and fund that tried to put San Jose on the map. You can think like the Pasadena Rose Bowl parade, as it was practiced back in this period of the 20th century. So-called Spanish conquistadors on white horses, lots of roses. These are all white people who are dressed up as conquistadores. A Mexican on a burro walking through the streets in this parade. This was an enormous effort by the city of San Jose to kind of market itself and its false history, right? This was an event that was boycotted by Mexican American activists who called it a party at our expense in 1969, and about 500 of them turned out to protest the Fiesta de las Rosas, calling it the Fiasco de las Rosas instead. This led to mass arrests and then allegations of police brutality against the protesters, which in turn, generated more political ferment in this period. Just a couple months later, the Chargan incident in September of 1969, a local Superior Court judge, a justice named Gerald Chargan, heard a court case that involved a charge that a young Mexican-American boy had committed incest with his sister. Chargan from the bench released this kind of racist tirade about Mexican Americans in San Jose, the East Side, and the United States, talking about Mexican so-called greasers, threatening this boy with deportation, and saying things like, "You are lower than animals," talking about Mexicans. "You are lower than animals. Maybe Hitler was right. The animals in our society ought to be destroyed." So this Chargan incident in the fall of 1969, just a few months after the protests against the Fiesta de las Rosas, motivated a generation of people also to take on City Hall, to organize, and to protest, I think, in new ways. Obviously, this was happening before 1969, but I think this was a kind of catalyzing moment when I spoke to local activists for many of them. You could see them also using this moment to argue for the importance of taking up space in the city. It was important to lowriders of the period that they were responding to Chargan and the racism of Chargan and the racism of the Fiesta de las Rosas kind of display, and that people were going to display for themselves Mexican culture as they saw it. But this even, you could suggest, kind of helps to drive another alternative forms of local history telling, which you could say might have culminated in some ways in the creation of the Heritage Plaza in 1999 and so forth. If I was going to name a third incident or a third moment, I might point to something that Josie was already referring to with Mike Garcia, and that's the rise of the new labor movement in the 1980s and the 1990s. Largely, or to a significant extent in this area, driven by SEIU, the rise of Latino labor organizers and their new presence around campaigns related to immigrant rights, but also labor rights in the region. So these are the three for me: 1952, 1969, and then generally maybe the late 1980s. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Josie?
The thing that comes to mind for me is the redistricting of the city, no longer at large elections, and we can have representation in San Jose. And that stands really clear because many Chicanos, Mexican Americans, Hispanics, although I think very few people call themselves Hispanics in San Jose. That happens in Texas a lot. So I would say that that's one that that we can talk about, and the inclusion of women in political life, not just with Blanca Alvarado being elected to city council, but other women running for office. So just thought I'd point it out.
Thank you, Josie. Alejandro?
Yeah, thank both of you. Stephen, when I was kind of writing my notes here, I kind of figured that you would talk about the CSO, since that's a big part of your book. I agree with you that I don't think you can pinpoint one particular moment, right? It's even hard to pinpoint three, right? Because you had the establishment of many political organizations, with the very first one, right, kind of being the CSO. But even if you go back a little further, where you have the Comisión Honorífica Mexicana, right here in San Jose, which looked to, right, which were the first sponsors of the Fiestas Patrias. They themselves, right, were very politically active in the city. So you can kind of date back even further with regards to the establishment of that organization in the late 1930s. But right, and then you have other organizations like the Mexican American Political Association that's founded in that's started in 1960 or 1961. Right, you have the CSO, you have the American GI Forum. You have the Confederación de la Raza Unida, which was kind of born out of the violence from the Fiesta de las Rosas. But I think one thing that's kind of overlooked is the establishment of a local newspaper in 1949, El Excéntrico. I think just the fact that there was a Spanish language newspaper that the community could read, that was coming from the community, is very political in nature. That newspaper was very important with regards to establishing an identity for Latinos here in San Jose, for communicating what was happening, right? The CSO, the American GI Forum, all of these organizations utilized the newspaper as a way to promote their activities and to promote their celebrations and to promote their agendas. So I think it's an often overlooked part of the history of San Jose, right? Is looking at El Excéntrico, which is one of the things that I do in my dissertation. I really focused on looking at the over 30 years that that newspaper was published, and looking at those primary sources and looking at how that newspaper actually impacted Latinos here in San Jose. With regards to the Fiesta and so, right, so kind of in the same time period, 1952, I'm saying 1949. With regards to the Fiesta de las Rosas, I think it's important to note that although it was protested by Chicano youth, there were Latinos, there were Mexican Americans that were part of the coordinating committee because it was very much a class issue as well. There were businessmen here in San Jose, Latino businessmen who saw the fiesta as a way to promote their businesses, right? As a way of boosting the city and a way of bringing people to the city, bringing tourism that would help them economically, right? With regards to their own businesses. So again, when we try to step back a little bit and not look at ourselves as a monolith, not looking at ourselves as homogenous, there are class differences that also come into play. And then Josie talked about district elections, the arrival of district elections in 1980. I think that's really important. And then when we look at kind of district elections and the arrival of district elections, it touches on what both of you already talked about with regards to coalition building, because it wasn't just driven by Latinos. There were a lot of homeowner organizations, right, that saw the value in district elections. And so this was Latinos participating and organizing with other groups in the city, right, in order to bring about district elections. And so since then, right, we've had a city council member of Latino descent since 1980. The arrival of district elections really institutionalized the East Side as a Latino seat. And I think it speaks volumes that the fact that I think we have about 4 members today in the city council that are of Latino descent. We have, I think, another 2 or 3 that are of Vietnamese descent. And so we have a very diverse city, and it's now being reflected in our city government because of the arrival of district elections. And so I think that's a very important year to kind of keep in mind with regards to, right, kind of important political moments in the city.
Thank you, Alejandro. Josie, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, the thing that I want to bring it to the national question that you talked about. So one of the places that intercession by government policies came through is with the economic and social opportunities programs. And basically it opened up housing, it opened up redevelopment opportunities for Mexican Americans in San Antonio, for Chicanos. And I think that as we tell the stories about the community, we also need to tell the stories of institutions and organizations that supported or challenged us to become the people that we are. So, you know, and many leaders, activists emerged from that area. Richard Rios comes to mind, and he's floating in there. So I'm going to go ahead and say that he ESO, economic and social opportunities, which made available options for men and women to become vocationally trained. Organizations such as the Opportunist Industrialization Center, which was, and it came through federal funding. That's why I'm mentioning it. So it has to do with national entities, and which later, you know, emerged into the Center for Employment Training, on a pretty big organization that's nationwide, that made available options for employment for people who otherwise would have never had it. So there is such a story to tell that if we try to fragment it into moments or particular instances, we're going to miss the stories of the people that created the possibilities for our community. And we need to keep telling the stories. Please write in whatever format so we can get them out there to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. And Josie, I'd like for you to begin by answering the final question. What does the story of the East Side teach us, and how can we apply that knowledge?
I think that for me, is the story of people who have the capacity and the ability and the desire to participate in the political process and to make their culture and their history visible despite the contestation that dominant society places upon them. That although San Jose is not recognized nationally like LA or San Francisco, that we're in par with them, and that we have a very strong community with people who have made significant contributions, and that it's possible to do that anywhere so long as the political process incorporates us as equal citizens, as we've been fighting to be incorporated. That's it.
Thank you, Josie. Alejandro?
So I think before we answer the question, right, we have to say, right, if the question is, what does the story of the East Side tell us? Well, what is the story of the East Side? And I think the story of the East Side is a story of social, cultural, political, and economic resilience. And I think the story of the East Side, the story of Latinos in San Jose, is a very familiar story to other ethno-racial minorities, to other Latino groups in other parts of the country. And I think that what we can learn is that equality and equity are not guaranteed, and that it's something that we need to fight for. It's not something that's going to be given to us all the time, even though it should be, it's not. And we need to take it. We need to demand it. And I think that what we can learn is that generations, our generation, the future generations, is that when we work for these struggles, that change doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen even within our own generation, that it's a persistent struggle, and it takes tenacity, it takes persistence, and it takes a lot of resilience. And I think that's just something that future generations should kind of keep in mind, that even though they might not see the change occurring right away, they need to realize and recognize that history teaches us that change is slow and it happens over time.
Thank you, Alejandro. Stephen?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, three things occur to me. One, I think the story of the East Side, reminds us that these histories are shaped by developments at different scales. They're very, very local, but they're also national and international histories that are present here in the East Side. You can't understand the East Side's growth and formation without understanding, things at the level of like the individual in the household and the street corner and the street and then, the neighborhood, but also this is an area that's shaped by big developments nationally and internationally. So, we need to keep our eyes on that. And if we tell the story correctly, I think that we somehow juggle all of those balls and think about them that way. The second is that I think the story of the East Side in some ways is arguably the story about how the margin moves to the center. I mean, the East Side is so marginalized over time, actively, for reasons that are intimately tied up with racism and classism and a dismissal of certain types of people and workers. And that's part of the story of the East Side. And yet the East Side also, as has been said, is home to such tremendous people, right? Such incredible artists, thinkers, activists, family members, leaders, and others. And so folks that are marginalized, oftentimes, in this case, have been able to move into the center and really define the larger region in ways that I think are really exciting. That's perhaps romantic, but I think there are real arguments for how that actually has happened in many ways. And third and finally, and this I think echoes in some ways what's already been said. If we want to tell the story of a place like the East Side, we need to do that hard. We need to work hard. I mean, these stories were not ones that were recorded in many archives 30 and 50 years ago. Many of the people who led the way and experienced the things we're talking about didn't have an opportunity to share their stories, write the things down that Josie's encouraging us to do today, which we urgently need to do. And so we need kind of community-centered, community-based methodologies, including oral histories, maybe especially oral histories, that allow us to collect and understand what's happened, and then be able to talk about this, share it with other people, and interpret it. So for me, that kind of the idea of local and international scales, the margin becoming the center, and the desperate need for community-centered methodologies, which I think my co-panelists have really pioneered in their work and their understanding of the East Side, are really, really important.
Well, Stephen, thank you very much. And well, thank all of you very much, because that concludes the panel questions. And now we're going to transition into questions for the panelists. Can you hear me through this? Yeah, all right, very good. And I'm sorry, I will be holding on to the mic. It is mine.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, hello. I think a chapter of the history of our people here in San Jose is what I call human technology. You guys referenced how we were janitors, we worked in the fields, things of that nature. Yeah. I think it's important to keep in mind that the people who worked in the fields and were the janitors and the women in the assembly lines, I think they're the people that I call human technology. They are the real backbone of what made Silicon Valley what it is today. They suffered, they had to work in the fields, come home with dirt, work with short-handled hose. So I think they're what I call the human technology. Beyond that, because of their sacrifices, young people were able to go to college. I'm specifically talking about San Jose State, not to exclude Santa Clara and other junior colleges, but I was a member of the group that organized the 50-year reunion of the Chicano student movement at San Jose State back in 2018. Now, what I think is that was the beginning at EOP. When I was there going there, we had at one point 1,400 Chicano students on campus. I don't know what the amount is now, but I think they were the people who inherited the sacrifices of human technology. And I think it's important to understand how the students were the ones who were the flowering of our professional classes and allowed us to be here talking the way we are right now. So if you can please, if you can, talk about the Chicano student movement and what they brought to making our place in the Santa Clara Valley. Thank you.
Gracias, Arturo. Gracias a todos los que vinieron. You don't know how much we appreciate it, how much you're needed here in San Jose. I'm going to expand our boundaries a little bit, like Dr. Hada did, and out of the east side in the general San Jose. In San Jose City College, we have a library named Professor Chavez. Good for them. But we're standing here in our main library of our branch of our system with 25 branch libraries. We couldn't name one for Cesar. I think that's an insult to the raza and even deficient for our culture. When our kids see that, they might not express themselves, but they internalize it. And they say, hey, maybe the stuff they say about it is true. And they can't even library for Cesar. What chance do I have? What chance do I have? And I've been passing around these flyers. You guys got one for a couple of years now. Ask people, please put it on the internet. Nothing, you know. I went before city council twice. And my thinking was a word to the wise. Nothing, you know, nothing. And I've gone to the local media. I sat on the sidewalk of Metro for 2 weeks, hoping they'd send someone out to talk to me. Nada. So let's do something together for our city. Speak up, speak up. City council, letters to the editor, your neighbors. I have flyers in English and Spanish. If you want some, please ask me. Yo Cesar Chavez.
I just want to say, I'm Cornelio Mata Lopez. I've been here. I was born in 1945, and I used to cut the apricots with my mom and dad and stuff like that. And but I want you to know, in San Jose today, I am an ambassador of the World Cup, and they know about San Jose. Okay, I represented I got to greet the Brazilian team, the Russian team right here at the San Jose airport. And I have a medal from the president. So us Mexicans can do it if you want. I did it through soccer. Okay, I coached YB high school, girls, and I had a bad time with the fathers. I did. They didn't want the girls to stay there and play soccer. They wanted them to go home and wash the dishes or wash the clothes and stuff like that. I had to argue with them, but I got 4 girls to get scholarships to college with soccer. Okay, so we can do it. Not everybody does it like this, but we do what we can. Thank you.
Warriors. Thank you. You are all distinguished authors of written books. Dr. Pitti, your book of the Silicon Valley is 25 years old. Josie's is a few years old, and Dr. Juarez is new, as is Dr. Villarreal. I want to ask you all a question. If you could add one more chapter to your book, what would it be about? Each of you. What would it be about?
The Chicano movement in Santa Clara County and the Bay Area.
So I have my dissertation. The book hopefully is forthcoming in a couple of years. So I will be adding a few chapters.
I hate to say it.
Well, in 10 years. So I have plenty of time to think about what I'm going to add to it. But the dissertation ends in 1980, and the goal was to bring it closer to the present. So I want to look at what was happening with Proposition 187. How did that impact San Jose? How are Latinos active? How are they impacted by that here in San Jose? And one of the things that I didn't talk about, but I did a lot of research on in my dissertation, is the impact of low riding with regards to the ways that Latinos claim space and use that as a political tool. So one of the things that I looked at in the dissertation was the Fiestas Patrias as a way of Latinos claiming space and then using that as a political tool. If we move further into the newer generations, how that claiming of space was also utilized, but not through cultural celebrations like the Fiestas Patrias, but through a new culture, through a Chicano culture of low riding. So that's something that I'm going to be adding.
Thank you, Stephen.
Whew. You know, I don't know. I mean, I think I wish that I had more to say about policing. I knew a lot about policing and critiques of policing that didn't actually make it into the book. And I wish that I could go back and do that. And then if I actually could write more, I would love to write about the kind of youth culture in the 21st century and the content continuities and discontinuities into the present as youth have done new things, some of which I think is a continuation of what happened in the past. And in other ways, there's a lot of energy and developments that strike me as very new in the 21st century.
Thank you.
Excuse me. My name is Jose Mendoza, and I came from Mexico in February 14, 1962. I started working for the first year washing cars. Next, I went to work for a Western wear store, which was my thing in Mexico. My grandfather and father had stores, and finally, 13 years later, I opened my own store, which the name was San Jose Menswear. And the point I'm getting, most of us came with little education, that we educate our children to have gone to university, and we were, like I say, no education. I had a friend who was also a customer. His 3 sons, he and his wife sent them to good, nice schools, and then finally went to Stanford and become a doctoral degrees, 3 of them, which was excellent for me to have a friend like him with little education or like mine, and have produced good citizens, and they are all professors at the universities here in California. Also, I have another friend has a couple of his sons with doctor's degrees. One is teaching, if I'm not mistaken, his father, which is my friend Victor Sanchez. His English is better than mine, but not excellent. But his son is teaching English. Guess who? Guess where? He's teaching English in England, which is terrific. Also, you know, Martians here, Mexican Martians especially, we were little, like the Flores family who had 3 grocery stores, small ones. They educate their children all the way to universities. And this is a little short story because we have so many people who came around my time, which older kids are educated. This is how we came. This is what we can do if we can come and work hard working, because doesn't come easy. It's very hard. As some people now I hear that they saw our work when they were trying to kick us out of the Tropicana Shopping Center. It was the 3rd time they were working on me, kicking me. They kicked me out from downtown. They kicked me out from downtown Salinas. So I was very mad with the city and San Jose Redevelopment Agency. I took over the flag to defend the Tropicana Shopping Center, and we were able to defeat the city because we had the people of San Jose and actually the Northern California give us their support, and that's why we were able to defeat the San Jose Redevelopment Agency.
Gracias.
Historians, there's the story to be collected.
Hi, guys. This is for all 3 of you. I was wondering if any of you ever thought or considered, or what do you think the value or the impact of Danza Azteca or any other native movements in the Chicano culture of East San Jose, especially since, you know, we now have our Mexico New Year's, the first place that was ever celebrated in the United States here. And as that culture was introduced to Chicanos back in the 70s, you know, within the Chicano movement, how do you see the impact of that up to now and maybe the future? Have you noticed that?
When the possibility opened up for me to consider or to speak up about doing something with danza, it was Mr. Segura came from Mexico to recruit people. And I was too strong a woman, and women were not encouraged to participate. So that was the extent of my involvement. In San Antonio, it's been a different story. There are groups of women who are danzantes, mexica danzantes, and that has had more of an access for me. So that was the extent of my connection, other than going to see presentations or to see them do bendiciones at different events when they came to open up spaces.
I think with Danza Azteca, I know I haven't had too much involvement with it, but it's something that I'm interested in. When I was, I currently was hired at Loyola Marymount University down in Los Angeles, but prior to that, I was teaching at Santa Clara University. I was teaching Latin American history. And I know I reached out to a few organizations to try and have Danza Azteca come to the university to have a performance. But there was a miscommunication, so I was never able to connect with anyone to have that come to fruition. With regards, I think it's important to note that, right, kind of as you mentioned, that it was the late 1960s, 1970s, where you have Chicanos trying to reclaim their identity and reconnect with our roots back in Mexico, and part of those roots are indigenous. Half of our racial makeup is indigenous, right? At least, right? When we look at kind of Spanish conquest with the conquistadores, with the indigenous peoples, native peoples of the Americas. And so I think it's important that we make more of an effort to put that at the forefront, and to put that at the forefront of what Chicano, Mexican American, Latino identity is, because I think there's an emphasis on, right, who we are as a people today, but sometimes we forget that even who who we are today has roots in indigenous past here in the Americas.
Stephen, did you want to address the question?
I think those answers were excellent. I don't have much more to say. I mean, I think this, I'll just re-say that, you know, this reminds me that the ways that people understand Mexican culture and what they value in Mexican culture and what Mexican culture means has changed over time. So Danza Azteca is incredibly important, and it has been for decades. I think probably its meaning has changed from the early 70s to today. And, you know, as Josie was saying, it's also, you know, different organizations have different approaches in different places. That would not have been an expression of Mexican nationalism or Mexican identity that would have resonated here or anywhere in the 1940s. So it was particular to a particular period. The second thing I would say, but very, very important to understand and to reckon with, think about. The second thing I would say is when I was starting to do this work on the project, I didn't probably pay as much attention to danza as I should have. I think what I also didn't know how to deal with in my own work as at the time, and maybe still, was how to think about indigenous migrations into California, which, as I'm sure everybody knows, you know, has become increasingly important since roughly the 1980s. So when we think about the kind of connection between indigeneity and Mexican / Latino cultural identities, that's really shifted over time, over the course of decades in the United States as the demographics have shifted, and how then we understand Danza Azteca in the context of you know, expressions of in places where there's also expressions of Zapotec identity, for example, transnational identity, is just something else I think it's important to talk about.
All right, thank you.
I just wanted to add one quick thing too, that I think it's also important to keep in mind that with Danza Azteca, it's a way of somewhat sensationalizing, right, this particular indigenous group, this particular indigenous history that's tied to Mexico. But that also kind of ignores the existence of other indigenous cultures that are very much living today. And I think with regards to the ways in which it's being maybe more recognized, might also have to do with an influx of indigenous people coming to the United States today, like people from southern Mexico, from like Oaxaca, just recognizing that there's more of an indigenous migration of people from Mexico to the United States today. So it's just something to keep in mind.
For me, I identified a little bit more with the Matachines dances because on my mother's side, all my uncles dance Matachines, and so I think I associated that with the indigenous dances when we went to powwows, and I found more identification with that because it spoke to my experience in my immediate family.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. Sorry about that. Just one more question.
So Josie, my father grew up in Mayfair. He went to Mayfair Elementary School, Pala, and wrestled and became state champion for James Lick. He was part of the first Mayfair Assembly. He was chairman of MAPA, CSO, the GI Forum, and many other organizations. My father's Al Garza, the first Mexican city councilman here. Now, the issue I want to ask everybody and just to think about is, look, the Mercury News attacked my father badly. There were accusations there that were not true. Our house burned down the day that we were going to get a loan for attorney Ron Reese to defend my father against Mercury News. And of course, that Bank of America pulled their loan back, and we ended up having to do something that's been really negative for my father. Now, my question is, or my suggestion is, maybe you can do something that would investigate how many Latinos have been crucified in the media. So I myself, when I ran for city council, the councilwoman said that my 85-year-old mother was stalking her, and the Mercury News printed it. So I run a great campaign, nothing negative, no photos. But the Mercury News persecuted me. But you know what? They started with my father because citywide, he ran unopposed. And the other city council members could not handle it. So hopefully something can be put in print about media and the negative effects they have on people who are individuals in the community. Thank you.
I agree with you that the Mercury News has not always been, or maybe has never been, our friend. For example, they instigated fights between Latinas who were running for office, either Anita Duarte and Blanca Alvarado, or Ernestina Garcia and Sofia Mendoza. They figured out ways to tease out contradictions that were fabricated to sell newspapers and to put people against each other. I know your dad. You know, his story is a sad story. He's from Del Rio, right? Originally, El Paso, okay. Okay, sorry. There's so many Texans here, I forget where they're from. So again, I think that that story needs to be told. And the only way that the story can be told is if somebody collects an oral history by your dad. And I think this is what I want to say is this is where the, it's not a fault. The misstep of the academy is when we go identify communities we want to study, and we have to figure out the way to identify the individuals we should interview. Your Al Garza never surfaced as a leader in the pre-interviews I did for my dissertation, okay, which is where my book comes from. Ron Gonzalez came up in the group, but he refused to participate. So again, it's one of those things where somebody needs to collect his oral history, and I think we need to have it reflect the record. Thank you for your story.
Yeah, my name is Sharat Lin. I want to just thank you for this amazing panel. I really learned a lot, but it touches me in many ways. So the first is that I have organized some labor tours of for example, the Almaden Quicksilver mine. And of course, if you go to the park, it's all about mining and about mercury. But you know, behind that is the workers, the labor that made the mining possible. You had the English camp and you had the Spanish camp, and that's whitewashed. As oh, they just spoke different languages. But no, you know, the fact is that the English miners didn't want to live with the people from Latin America. That's what it was. But it's very hard to uncover the truth, to get the stories behind that. Second thing is, you know, we're celebrating today the victory that is allowing the cruising in San Jose. Up until 2010, the San Jose Police Department had these random checkpoints on Santa Clara Street. And the fall of 2010, we had a new police chief, Chris Moore. I went to him, handed him two reports, published reports, news reports that I had published about the checkpoints. And I handed them to Chris Moore and I said, "Are you aware of this problem?" And he said, "No, but I'll look into it." The next year, 2011, the checkpoints vanished. Okay, so this is a backstory, but you know, it is something that paved the way for the victory that we have today. Okay. Third thing I don't want you to forget is the biggest political event of you could say it came from the East Side, right? The biggest political event in San Jose's history was the El Gigante, right? The 2006 march, more than 250,000 people, the biggest march probably in the whole of Northern California, was here in San Jose on May 1st. Okay. And then finally, current struggles, we have the Fallon statue. Let's not forget that. Okay, thank you so much.
I believe we have just one more question.
I'll be really quick. My name is Elizabeth. I'm half Black, half Latina, and I really resonate with what you were saying. I'm not from San Jose, I'm originally from Oakland, but I can relate. When I came here as a student to get my sociology degree, I really connected with being in San Jose. I live in Santa Clara Street, went to La Pulga, and now I'm doing organizing work on the east side in the Castell neighborhood. And a lot of what that's about is the lead that's coming from the airplanes there. And so I want to uplift the Castell United in terms of the señoritas, señoras, the organizers there who have been for decades demanding the closure of Reed Hillview because it is toxic and it's hurting our community in so many different ways. And so I just want to say that not being taken advantage of, that fight, that's something that I resonate with my Latino, Latinx community. So I think that's another thing for any historians in the room to research how Castell became Castell and what's happening now. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and encourage everybody to write a letter to Lofgren and the city council to support the library. A library be named for, I'm gonna write and I'm gonna send a letter. Okay, so I want to encourage you and give me your name again. Yeah, you. No. Elizabeth, you're not half and half, you're 100% both cultures. Don't forget, that's how we are devalued. You're 100% Black or African-American, and you're 100% whatever your ethnicity is, because Latina is another pan-ethnic term. Don't forget, that's how we get reduced to fragments. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for attending. I want to give one last person a word before we close this panel. Estela, please come and give us our final thoughts here. Estela.
I almost got away without talking, almost.
Tell us your new title.
My new title is Research Services and Social Sciences Librarian for San Jose State. And so I just want to point out, as Josie kept saying, the whole purpose of the exhibit was to capture stories. There's a lot of stories to be captured. That's the whole purpose of this, is to keep bringing people in, keep doing this. This actually started from the lowrider exhibit that I could actually thank Alejandro for, because he's the one that came into the California room and asking for history. And this all sparked from one question that he gave. And that just is the power of a question. You guys have questions, that gets us to start doing the work and look behind what resources we have for you. That's the purpose of the library, and we're going to keep building towards it. This is just the beginning. I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I do know this is just the beginning of what we started. And I'm going to keep working what I can, keep doing collaborations. And now she works with me, so now she can't get away from me. And Shane already promised that he'll be in with whatever project I have. So we're going to keep going. We really need you guys. We need the community. We need you to bring in the history and trust us with your history. Know that it's important to everybody and not just scholars. It's important to everybody. So thank you. And thank you for trusting us so far.
I did need to give her a heads up that I was going to ask her to say a few words. So, so again, thank you all for coming. I just want to ask to please fill out the survey. You can go through the QR code and do it through your phone if you'd like. Okay. And I just want to mention there is a lot of the El Excentrico, the Trevino materials. There are materials that we are collecting, and we are putting them up online. So we have the Jose Villas Trevino papers available online. Of course, El Excentrico is already available online through Internet Archive. And we're also continuing to try to work to get El Excentrico copies in color. So the Internet online Internet Archive is just black and white, but we're trying to get the color copy available. And clearly, there are many of you that have stories. And we understand that giving papers to the libraries or to strangers, and hopefully, you know, Estela is obviously the key person here, and thank goodness she's now with the university, I'll say. But you know, we do need to collect the stories, and we realize that in many cases there are some stories that can't be told anymore because the papers are gone, the families are gone. You know, the children have moved on and didn't understand the importance of the documents that their parents were part of. So if anything of what this Eastside exhibit is about, it's really the documentation that perhaps might be in that garage, in that box in the far corner, that, you know, that we want you to start looking at. Because we do need to collect those stories. We need to collect the CSOs. And of course, from a meeting that I was with Stephen, you know, we were said the CSO is gone. There's no materials. There's no way that we're going to collect those items. But we hope there's something. There's a treasure in some garage that that you might have that you can share with us, so that we can scan it and we can make it available to the researchers like Stephen and Josie and Alejandro. I mean, this is why it's so important to work with your local library and your librarian. And we have Estela, did I say that? But thank you all for coming. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Josie. Thank you, Alejandro, and thank you, Arturo, for the panel. Thank you again to Shane, I'll close it. And thank you for coming this Labor Day weekend on a Saturday. Stay cool, and thank you so much.